Now, your access point. You want to use the best encryption method you can if you don't have a wireless LAN controller to take care of that for you. That probably, for most home models, will be WPA, maybe WPA2. Just don't use WAP because you might as well not have any. No, it's not that bad. It's still better than nothing. Also, my story about the Thai restaurant, absolutely true. I saw an SSID that said Linksys. I went in there to the default, I mean, I didn't even guess. I just guessed. I said, I'm going to go to 192.168.1.1, bam! Opened right up to the page, admin, no password, bang! I was right inside. I could have destroyed the network and made it only so I can get in. Here's what you do. You change the default SSID. You don't leave it to say Linksys or D-Link or whatever it comes with out of the box. You could disable the broadcast. Now what's going to happen is that your Windows machine will still see that there's a network there, but it won't list the name. And when you go to associate with it, that's when you have to type the SSID in. And if you get that right, then you begin the association. But again, so change passwords, change the default SSIDs, choose whether or not you want to disable the broadcast of SSIDs, and make sure your wireless network is separate from your wired network, especially that isolation, just in case. I mean, if you're needing people to get onto the wired network, you can't do that. But if it's just for internet access, separate those two. Otherwise, put your wireless network and your internet access only zone or DMZ, you just separate them out. The isolation is designed to try to keep your internal network free. So you can put it in the internet or the DMZ, and all that means is that there's a firewall that's protecting the traffic that's going in and out of that access point from getting into the wired network. Because we generally do that. We generally control the access from the internet into the wired, and we also control access from the DMZ into the wired. So we do all of those things to try to secure your access point. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at this Netgear router / access point that we have. And I've already connected to it. It is my default gateway, so I just went to that address. I logged in by the defaults. And as most any type of, oh, in fact, there, look at that. It was prompting me again because I probably waited just a bit too long to connect. But like most any device, they have a little setup wizard that would let you go through, ask you some basic questions, and boom, you're done. But let's just talk about what we're going to need to actually make our own connections with an access point. So remember, the access point is the connection from the wireless to the wired network. And in the scope of what we do here with Network+, we are not going to have a wireless LAN controller, which means that all configuration information will be per access point and up to us to be able to configure at each site. It also means that we'll lose some of the functionality of roaming and a lot of other cool things that you can get with a more expensive solution. But this is going to be the vast majority of our networks that you run into, are just the single access point. So, internet service, does the provider that you connect to require a login? And if they do, you choose the yes. You choose who that service provider might be, and then you kind of go from there. If not, then we're not going to do a login. But you may still be required, if you are directly connecting to the WAN, the wide area network, and it's a local account, you might still be required to have credentials from that service provider. In fact, in many settings, it is the wireless access point connected to the WAN or the cable modem or the DSL, and so it's going to be the one that gets its own address from the service provider. If this access point is in the middle of your network and it provides access to a specific LAN area, you might use it as or have its own static address, so you can choose static address and get that information on its own. Anyway, we're going to get our address from our service provider in this particular case. And then as far as the DNS settings, we can again get that DNS information from our service provider, or we can provide it with our own DNS server. Now, I've pre-populated this apparently at one point with this 4222, which by the way is a valid DNS server. It's a free DNS server you can use. Of course, that means everybody's using it, which means it might be a little slow. So I'll put its twin, the 4221, as a backup secondary DNS server. Some service providers require that you register via a web page, and that's often done from your actual PC connected to the cable modem. When that happens, then suddenly your MAC address is the one that is registered with the service provider, which means that you might have to use the MAC address of your computer as the MAC address for this wireless or this access point. We call that MAC cloning, and so use this MAC address as a way of being able to do MAC cloning. Well, we're not doing that here, so we'll just use the default address. And then when you're done, you can test your settings or keep them. I'm going to click on Apply. And those are some of the basic settings. We'll wait for that to go through. Now that was the basic connectivity. How does my access point connect to the service provider or to the wired portion of my network? And so that's the information that I was putting in there. The next thing we're going to do is look at the basic wireless settings. What am I going to give to those clients that are connecting to me? And we're going to look at some of those options that we have. And then we'll talk about some security issues, some filtering, and we'll go into some of the advanced stuff. Okay, so wireless settings. Now we all need to have an SSID. That is your system's identification name. It's not too consequential other than you need to have one for people to identify your radio network. So this one we called Film Studio. Its region automatically is chosen the United States. And the channels are important. Now, channels allow me to have basically competing access points. If I have 2 or 3 access points in my office and I put them all on the same channel, then we're actually, for those areas where we overlap our coverage, we're going to have a contention. We're going to be fighting each other for specific bandwidth. Even if you're at home and you have a home network, you may want to choose a specific channel number that's different than those channel numbers being used around you, so that when you're using your wireless network connection, you're not going to be competing again with anybody else in the neighborhood. And then you have to choose the type of access, where we've mostly talked about A, B, and G. There's also the N standard that's out there. But A, B, and G are the most popular of those. G and B, the most popular. B being kind of a slower, less distance, G being faster. And so this mode allows me to be able to negotiate both. The other thing we have to deal with is what type of security authentication. Now, if I choose none, then that means that anybody who hears this SSID being broadcast can connect to my network and instantly have their connection up and running and access to my network. WAP was this brief little WAP key that we could create. Automatically created this little key. We basically would put a passphrase in here like hello world, and then generate some keys, and then the users need to have one of these keys to be able to connect. The downside is this key is not very big. These are hexadecimal values, and if you look at it, that's 3, 4, 5 bytes in size. That's 40 bits for a key. It says 64-bit encryption, but WAP was a 40-byte key with a 24-bit key. Let me try it again. 40-bit key with a 24-bit extra added onto it to try to make it a little more difficult to guess the actual key. If I chose 128-bit and regenerated these, you can see that it's a lot longer key, but unfortunately, WAP still only takes between 8 and 20 minutes to be able to crack. The next part is using WPA with a pre-shared key. Unfortunately, again, this key, depending on how strong or weak you make it, we could make, this kind of somewhat complex one, the name of a local baseball team where I live. In this case, it's okay, but if it's a lot of dictionary words, it won't take long to crack, again, between maybe 8 to 15, 20 minutes. If I use something with some sort of complexity that makes it more difficult for somebody to get into, then that's great. It's harder to do with a dictionary attack, but try to tell everybody what to type, that gets a little annoying. So again, what I'm trying to say is there's no perfect solution here to setting these up. So, and it just continues to go on with all of these different options that you have with passphrases and everything else. So I'm going to leave it at none right now, just to kind of ease out the configuration. I did change the channel to 6, hoping that nobody else is there overlapping with me, and I'll wait for those settings to be updated. All right, now we'll take a look at the content filtering. So now logs I think are an important aspect. Looking at the logs, and this access point's been doing nothing, so there's just not a lot of logs information here. But it's good to use for, I like to say, as being proactive. You can click refresh if you think there's more going on. But being proactive means just looking for signs of hazards that could be occurring or attacks. When we look at blocked sites, so there's a lot of ways of blocking sites, and this device, this Netgear device, is on the home network scale. If you were to go out and get like maybe the beginning line of a Juniper SSG product, it allows you to use things like WebSense, which means that I don't have to pick a specific domain that I want to block, or come down here and add a keyword like adult as a keyword, because unfortunately lots of things can come up with that word. In fact, here's one that I hated for the longest time many years ago. It was when people would add the keyword XXX, because they're saying, okay, anything with a XXX in the title or anywhere in the content obviously is adult porn. And unfortunately, back then, Super Bowl 30 was XXX, and it blocked all my access to those sites. So I like things like WebSense as a better option, but this is kind of a filter to keep people at work, at home, from going to content that might be objectionable. Or you have some perhaps overrides where this would have been good for me, wanting to go to that Super Bowl 30 site, because I can put myself in as the trusted IP that kind of gets around these little options. So those are blocked sites, just trying to basically inspect the stuff that's coming through. But do remember that it only blocks sites that are not using encryption. If I, as a user, am connecting to a site that requires encryption, then the access point will never see that information, because it's going to be encrypted between my PC and the server, and the access point will only be able to read the IP addresses. So it's not a perfect technology in that aspect. Blocking services. Again, we talk about adding some services, those being TCP, UDP, or both. Port numbers that we don't want to allow in. Maybe I don't want any web services coming in, so I can start and block port 80. Right, service types, or look at this, there are different types of pre-built ones. Maybe I don't want Telnet to be used. And I might filter them for everybody or for certain ranges. Again, it's in a way a type of firewall filtering. It's just not letting any of those types of communications through this device. Schedule is another interesting option. You might choose that you want to block during certain times of the day or night. So again, lots of options there that are just on the security side of it. Now, as far as the router status, that's mostly letting you know how it's running, let you know what version it is. Interestingly enough, it lets you know about the ports, the broadcast name, if you're using what we're going to do for the internet side. In fact, in this case, my internet side, you can see I have an address already assigned to me. I'm a DHCP client, so that was the information I got from my service provider. Going on through to attached devices would let me know basically what PCs are connected to me, whether wired or wireless. Backup settings. If you like your settings and you're worried that somebody's going to erase or destroy your configuration, you can back that up. Or if you make some changes and you want to restore one that you've backed up, that's great. Setting a password is very important on any type of device. Right now, the password on this is the default password. So, and it's written on the box. It's on the actual router, so it's really easy to break in. And if you don't change those things, then I guess you deserve to get hacked. And of course, anything running software may need to go out there and get new updates or new versions. So if I were to click on check, then it would go out there and try to get to the Netgear server to let me know if I need a new operating system or any updates. And apparently I'm up to date there. Finally, the advanced settings, wireless settings. Okay, so here it says every time I connect, it's going to look for a new version, or I can do my own router upgrade there. But here we go, advanced settings. The radio. Right now I have the radio turned off. That means that I actually cannot use any wireless connections to get to me. I have to use the wired ports. Now, this is something that's important for me here in my studio because it would actually cause some interference perhaps with my audio, so that's why it's off. But if I did turn it on, another security feature is whether or not we should broadcast the SSID. Now, if you know the SSID, you can make the connection with me without any problem. It's just whether or not I want to broadcast it to make it easier for you to get to me. I can also create an access list for wireless cards, and I can turn the type on of wireless cards, the device name and MAC address. That says that kind of like trying to filter different devices from connecting to me or filtering out the SSID, I can at least make a static list of who is allowed to connect to me based on their MAC address. Again, it's all, and I'm going to cancel these out, it's all about trying to secure my settings. Now, you may have some devices inside your network that you want to have connections to a specific device. As an example, you don't see it here, but I have one a device that is called a sling box. And what that sling box does is it allows me to forward a request from the outside for connectivity. So I might have an internal address like .5, and I might want to edit the service, or actually I'm going to add my own custom service. And I would call it sling box, and it's TCP only. And so basically what I do is I connect to my address from the outside. I'm out on the road, I'm traveling, I'm at a hotel, and it uses port 5309. And so what I do is I connect to my to this router with its public address. I connect to it on port 5309, and it automatically redirects it to this address inside my network that is my sling box. And so that's what this forwarding was doing, is to make sure that we knew that if somebody came to the public address of my firewall here, or my wireless router, and they connected on port 5309, to actually just forward it to this device on the inside, like I said, which is my, my sling box. So that'd be my port forwarding, port triggering. On the WAN setup, we might have some servers that are on the DMZ world. That's the demilitarized zone that we want to have access to. It's a little bit different than having an actual internal machine. I may or may not want to respond to ping should somebody be trying to locate me. For some services, we may have to deal with the negotiations of MTUs. And for network address translations, we may have some types of filtering options. This SIP is for the phone traffic, so whether or not we want to allow some device, a phone device, voice over IP on our inside to get out and do its setups with the WAN side. The LAN side, of course, has, look at this, its own static address for the LAN port, and it has its own DHCP setup where I create my own scope and act as a server, create my own address reservations if I need to. It's the same as we would have talked about in our previous DHCP discussions, only it's being done on my wireless router instead of on my Windows server. Dynamic DNS is kind of a cool thing that we use these days. We don't want, some of us live in areas where to have a public IP address that's static, that doesn't change, costs more money per month, and we still want to have our own web-hosted solution in our house, and suddenly the service provider changes your IP address. Well, Dynamic DNS is going to go out there and change all the DNS records so that it has your new updates. So that's kind of a cool thing that's out there. And because it is a router, you may have some static routes to other devices in your network. And again, not all wireless access points have a port connected to the internet like I have here. And you may also want to turn on some of the remote management. In other words, whether or not somebody like me can connect to this device, in this case, so from the outside interface instead of from the inside. And then, of course, some documentation and help. So there's a lot of options that you have in this wireless access point, and I hope that I've explained them enough to give you the ideas of some of the things you should consider when you're doing your configuration. The only thing I would add to this discussion is that if you had a wireless LAN controller, what we call a WLAN controller, you could store all of these configuration options in one setting and actually push it out to all the access points, and kind of gives you that centralized administration, which is also pretty cool. But that was a lot of options just from a home perspective of what it takes to create an access point.